Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton Agenda Wani dan saya cukup berbesar hati kerana hari ini saya ada 3 tokoh tempatan dan antarabangsa untuk membincangkan tentang isu yang mendepani semua kita di Malaysia, di Asia Tenggara dan juga di seluruh dunia, iaitu tentang etika dan integriti. Oleh itu saya ingin minta izin untuk bicara dalam bahasa Inggeris. Like now to introduce my honoured guests for today, and they are all 3 of them experts in the field of ethics and integrity. Closest to me is Professor Charles Sanford, President of International Institute of Public Ethics in Brisbane, Australia. Thank you so much, Professor, for making time. And then we have our very own Professor Emeritus Dr. Abdul Rahman Nembong, Fellow from the Institute of Integrity Malaysia. Thank you so much for also making time. And last but not least, Frederick Galton, President for Integrity for Action, all the way from London. Again, thank you so much for making time. This issue has been talked about before on this show, on this channel, about ethics and integrity. But I want to start with a broad overview of how do you scope ethics and integrity, especially in the plural society like Malaysia, where we have diverse meaning given to the context due to the various diversity of background, religion, culture, ethnicity, and etc. Layer on top that the shrinking world of politics, business, and even socio-economy. So interrelations, interactions at the global level with different perspectives and values. So maybe I'll start with Professor Sanford first, then I'll get the local interpretation from Professor Dr. Abdul Rahman Nembong. Then of course, we always go back to the UK, even for football, and that's what I want to go back to you. So Professor Charles Sanford.
One of the projects that I most enjoyed leading was done just after 9/11, funded by Soros, who asked me what project I most wanted to do. And it was a series of dialogues on governance values between Muslims and Westerners.
Okay.
It was based on the assumption, and I think it was very much borne out, that there are not some ethical religions or ethical cultures, and the other ones are unethical. What we have in most cultures, which have got long-standing, is that various crises have produced authoritarian values, and they've produced what we might call more human-centred, lots of different words, human-centred, liberal, or whatever you want to describe it. And that it's certainly all cultures have authoritarian values. Let's face it, the West produced Nazism and Bolshevism in a single century. And if they're not the 2 worst governance regimes in history, they're certainly up there in the semi-finals, and that on the other hand, they have these more human-centred values, ones that we'd think, and of course, those who actually have authoritarian values, who actually want to consider other countries and other religions and other races as hatefully, they don't want to have dialogues. The dialogues between those who do share these more human-centred values are really interesting, and it's not that they're identical. But the principles are what I call congruent, that they're similar enough, they play the same function in those societies. And it's not that if they're identical, then it would mean that basically that Confucius, Jesus Christ, Buddha and Muhammad had not said anything new or interesting or original. As an ethicist, I see ethics developing, but there isn't a final answer, and there will be slight variations between those principles. Much greater variations within a culture between the human-centred values of most religions and the authoritarian values than there are between different ones. But I think we can't expect absolute identity, and in fact, we'd lose the dynamism of what we can learn from different cultures if they were.
Prof. Rahman, on our context.
Thank you.
Which might be a bit different than that.
I think the question of what is right and what is wrong is cuts across
everywhere.
Cultures, religions, and even geography, countries. So, and to me, ethics defines what is right and wrong. Now, in the context of Malaysia, I mean, or anywhere else, I mean, stealing is wrong. Stealing a person's property or stealing public property through your position in the public service or things like that, that is unethical. Now, but of course there are certain variations in terms of cultures and religions where certain cultures and religions may see that particular behavior or action as correct, but in other contexts, it may be viewed as unethical or lacking in ethical values and so on. But I think, in general, we can talk about certain convergences, like Professor Charles Sanford talked about, in terms of ethical values across humanity, across civilizations, and across countries. And I think that is why now we, the various countries and organizations in the world are talking about what you call that, realigning in global action, in order to come strong on ethics and integrity for governments, for international organizations, for civil society, and so on. So I feel that whilst we give due respect to diversity, to cultural differences, and so on, we can still come to agreement on certain fundamental principles that define ethics and integrity.
Frederick, but globally, it's not just black and white. And they say that it's within the grey areas where issues such as this is even more important to be looked at.
So I completely agree with your premise in that sense, but let me take a step back from it. So we set up this organization called Integrity Action in London in 2003 to find answers to 4 questions. One was, how can regular people make a difference? Improving public services by reducing fraud and corruption and building integrity. The second was, how would we know we're making that difference? How can we measure it? The third was, how do you teach it? And the fourth was, how do you compete with integrity against less scrupulous competitors? So that is what we set out to do. It took us almost a decade to find good answers to those first 2 questions. And let me start with the measurement. Because what we have as an issue, everyone agrees that governance, integrity, ethics are important. But there haven't been good ways of measuring that. Even the definitional issues. Do we have more in common? Do we have more that distinguishes that? Actually, I leave that to the philosophers. What I'm interested in knowing is, what is the outcome? How do I know that whatever I'm doing makes a difference? So that's an outcome. And in this field of governance, anti-corruption, transparency, openness, etc., there haven't been good outcome measures. What we came up with, and I published in a paper a couple of years ago, is something we call the fix rate. If I can solve a specific problem using one type of institution, that's a single fix. Solving a problem to the satisfaction of the main stakeholders. The rate at which I do it, that percentage, is my fixed rate. And by comparing fixed rates, we can see how effective. Now, coming back to your integrity and ethics, this is where the beauty of it comes in, is that, to take Charles Sanford's point, authoritarian approaches produce lower fixed rates. They seem like they're more efficient, actually they're less efficient. And it's integrity and ethics-based approaches combined with compliance that actually produce the highest fixed rates. And we can show that from the work we've done across 11 countries.
I have to go for the first break, but once we are back, I want to discuss specifically about the C word, corruption, everywhere around the world. From public services right up until high-level corporate boardrooms, right down on the ground to just a football match supposedly for us to be enjoyed, but we were conned all the way from the very beginning because it was fixed. So it seems insurmountable, combating all these at all fronts at the same time. But is there hope that we can? If Sweden can have something of a policy called zero accident, why can't we have zero corruption as a goal and metric to be measured and works towards that? Let's discuss that after the short break. You are still watching Agenda Wani, and we're still talking about a very fundamental thing for our civilization, which is ethics and integrity. And even accounting firms now are thinking of ways to instill and measure integrity and ethics within what they do. And then they can, of course, offer that services to a lot of companies around the world. However, I want to go back to the basic that I was talking about today. We see corruption and we hear about corruption everywhere. Recently, there was this big move in the largest state in Malaysia, and nearly $500 million worth of effort, just about illegal logging. So I want to go to Prof. Emeritus Dr. Abdul Rahman first. And how do we make society feel that this is a fight that we can win? it's not supposed to be there naturally because it can be dealt with.
I want to differentiate between zero corruption and zero tolerance of corruption.
Okay.
Now, zero corruption is aspirational, and
Ideal.
It's an ideal. It is something, for the future. But zero tolerance of corruption is something that you can do now and immediately, and with tough enforcement, investigation, and urging for the cooperation of the public and so on. And I think this is the crux of what the National Integrity Plan talks about. That is, we want to promote among the public officials, among the civil society, among the public generally, and also among the private sector, that we cannot tolerate corruption and we cannot tolerate behavior and actions that undermine the integrity and the governance of the country. So, and in the context of Malaysia, you see that in line with the position that we cannot tolerate corruption, the earlier anti-corruption agency has been upgraded to become the what do you call that?
Commission.
Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission with more powers and so on, and they have been urged by the public. The public wants to see results, and I think the recent actions that they have been taking are steps in the right direction. Except that investigating corrupt activities on such a massive scale is something, is not a cup of tea.
That's why I want to get at. If we scope it a bit more microscopically, technology helps nowadays because this is something that maybe only 2% will be involved with, but it implicates others.
Yes.
So if none of the two wants to come forward, then who will be able to make that first report and giving that information to the agencies?
Well, of course, technology helps, and you can even use your handphone in order to spot if you happen to come across that. But I think corrupt activities cannot be hidden away, cannot be concealed just like that, because people can. And the visible signs of corrupt activities
it will surface somewhere.
Will surface somewhere, especially like illegal logging. You can know. The question is enforcement. Enforcement is very important.
13 years ago at the Seoul International Anti-Corruption Conference, I said, yes, you can get rid of government corruption. Permanently, instantaneously, and overnight if you want to. And I admitted that if you did everything that I suggested, and I was right, really rather huge propositions, you could only reduce corruption maybe 99%, but you could eliminate corruption permanently, instantaneously, overnight. Room quieted, eliminate government. No government corruption. Now, traditionally, of course, anarchists of the left and more recently the right think this is fantastic. But most of us are horrified. Why is it? It is because we want governments to do things. Now that we have debate about what they should do, how much they should spend and so forth, but most people want governments to do things. And to do so, they actually take a risk. Because what we do with governments and institutions and corporations, professions, we concentrate power, people and resources for a certain purpose, for a beneficial purpose. But in concentrating those power, people and resources, those resources can be abused, which of course is the definition of corruption. So to some extent I see it as society takes a risk in having government, and all our anti-corruption ethics and integrity things is to try to address that risk, to try and see it as risk management. But I think we've got to see it as risk management. If you were going to have perfect absence of corruption, you either have absence of governance, or sometimes some governments come in and they're so keen to stop corruption that government itself stops, and they would prefer to have the general back who gives you half a school rather than no school because you're so tied up in process. So I think we should see integrity and corruption as risk management, and we basically want to get to the point where the rational civil servant and the rational businessman consider it too risky to engage in corruption. And then we have to deal with the irrational businessmen and the irrational civil servants.
Some look at it as risk management, but there are others who look at it as, it's because I just can't have access of information. I don't see these things because they can be done behind the scenes. And, you know, the new social media, WikiLeaks and whatever else, these are the new tools that supposedly give us more power to know, because transparency works for the society in checking corruption and unethical behavior, for example. But where do you stand in this particular view?
Theodore Roosevelt said, you know, an uneducated man can steal from a railway car, but only a man with a university education can steal the whole railway. Right? So to get away with stealing $50 million, $100 million, you have to be well educated, or at least have a very good lawyer, accountant, business manager, etc. You cannot get away with it if you don't have very clever people working for you. But that's not the big point I want to make. In fact, you're asking this very appropriate question about technology. And there has been a movement towards open government in various parts of the world over the last decade. WikiLeaks has been part of that. And the question, again, I would ask is, what is the fix rate of these different interventions? So I take an example from India. There is a website called I Paid a Bribe, where thousands of Indians have reported bribe requests by public officials. They do it anonymously, they don't give the name, but thousands upon thousands, more than 40,800 cities. I approached them and asked, what is your fix rate? What is the rate at which these problems reported get resolved? It's almost zero. Now, what happens when your fix rate is so low, it actually destroys trust in society. We have developed another smartphone application. We won a big award from Google a couple of years ago. It's used in 11 countries. It's called Development Check. It functions in 6 languages. And we can show that our fix rate is more than 50% after 12 to 18 months. For every fix that you achieve, you actually build trust. So I actually, with due respect, want to move away from the zero tolerance concept, which actually has very little meaning, even in the most industrialized settings. What I want to move towards is higher and higher fix rates, and engaging citizens in that process.
Giving results.
Giving concrete results, precisely. Results speak much, much louder.
I have to go for the last break, but once we are back, I want to take from each panelist a micro example of what has given you hope in this quest to move forward for society full of ethics and integrity, because I want to give myself the ability to throw one first, because I'm still perplexed that all these years after the subprime crisis, no one practically has been indicted over such a scam that even traversed national borders. From America, it went all over to Europe. And if we talk about fixed rate, then that's one of the bigger things to look at. Let's talk about that, and each of my panelists can give their own views of certain things that give us positivism moving towards the future on this particular subject matter. After this. The world is getting more complex, and one person can do so much damage to the whole civilization of mankind. So ethics and integrity is key, but I want to throw back again our dark memories to the subprime crisis, and until now, who's really responsible, which individual or which corporation and stuff like that. I want to start with Frederick first, since you start about fixed rate, but after that, please give me and the audience nice examples of optimism going towards the future.
Actually, the one thing that inspires me in our work enormously, we have a network of over 500 universities and schools in 60 countries that we support. It's the biggest network of its kind. And in Palestine alone, we work with 200 schools. And in these schools, teenagers between the ages of 15 and 17 implement this approach we call community integrity building. They pick projects that are not working and they try to fix them. I can tell you what the fixed rate is. It's 32%. The average value of these projects, and it's all online, it's all transparent for anyone to see, is well over $100,000. So they don't pick small projects. They actually pick important projects. This could be a health center, a youth center, a road, a bridge, water for the whole community. And they try to fix them. So 32% is less than our average, but it's phenomenal that it's being achieved by youth. And now the Ministry of Education in Palestine wants to increase this from 200 schools to 1,000 schools. It means every year these teenagers will not learn about ethics integrity. Of course, they will do that as well. But that goes in one year, it goes out the other. They will actually do it. And that's transformative.
Experiential learning, Prof. Sanford?
I always think optimism is dangerous because optimism should be something that drives action rather than actually as a substitute
itself,
for it.
yeah.
The reason that I'm most hopeful is basically how the redistributive effects of corruption.
Okay.
That a small number of people benefit at the expense of a very large number of people. And the large number of people are normally extremely angry. And even in countries where people say it's tolerated. It's not tolerated. It's normally hated, but people don't think they can do anything about it.
Okay.
But if in fact it gets to the point where it looks as though something can be done, it's amazing how people get behind it. In Queensland, the thing is that people were really angry when they discovered that the state was the most corrupt state in Queensland and in Australia, and they were extremely angry. But when I went to Indonesia, the World Bank in 1998, the corruption was much worse and the people were much angrier. And I think that's the great reason why I am optimistic is that ultimately corruption benefits the few against the many,
yes.
and the many will get angry. What they need to do is to have mechanisms, and there are so many of them. And the problem is that there are so many mechanisms you can deal with. Actually, I can give you 10 examples if you wanted to. But the thing is, there is a resistance by those who are corrupt, and the Americans call it regulatory capture. And I think as the GFC, the subprime crisis, the response has been a subject of regulatory capture has not been yet liberated.
Okay.
Can I just throw in a statistic?
Sure.
Since the year 2000, there have been 15 social revolutions in the world, the most famous in the Arab Spring, but actually all over. And 13 of these were triggered by corruption. So it only reinforces people are not patient. They want change, and 3 of these countries have had 2 revolutions within that decade.
Prof. Ismail, Prof. Rahman, but we are moderates. We don't want to burn ourselves and then start a revolution. How do we do it?
Well, I think if you look at the scandals, the corporate frauds, and also the mega corruption and so on, of course, you tend to feel a sense of despair.
Yes.
But I am an optimist.
Okay.
Because if we look at the context of Malaysia, you will say that, okay, we are moderates within quotes, right? I mean, 12 years ago, people would not talk about anti-corruption openly.
Yep.
But since then, with the implementation of the National Integrity Plan, the setting up of the Malaysian Institute of Integrity, the forums, and so on and so forth, and people are now talking about it openly. So in short, we cannot take their silence for granted. Something is happening among the society, and it was the pressures from the people that later push for action. That later on, the Anti-Corruption Agency was upgraded to the Anti-Corruption Commission. Now, I think that's one. That gives hope, though it is not that, not
in your
fast,
face,
not
instantly.
Yeah. Now, if you look at Indonesia is quite an interesting country. I mean, it is very low on the CPI, right? The Corruption Perception Index is 100 plus, but now it has improved. Now, their Anti-Corruption Commission was set up in about
after
2004, 2005, right? After Reformasi. And it was because of the desire of the people for change. That corruption angered them. I mean, anti-Suharto and all that. And I think it is that demand and desire for change
by the people
that will
That's
push
still
the
best of all the things I've discussed so far since then until now. That is back in the hands of civil society especially. Gentlemen, you guys have to come back again. There's not enough time to talk about everything. Prof. Abdul Rahman, I'm for sure going to pull you here soon. But the other gentlemen, thank you so much. The door is always open at this studio for you to come again and discuss about ethics and integrity. For me, the letter C is very important, not for corruption, but communication. If there's transparency, if there's access to information. But anda boleh hantarkan pandangan anda sendiri. Ada pelbagai platform yang anda boleh hantar. Ada Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. Ataupun terus turun aplikasi Mudah Alih iOS dan Android supaya anda boleh menonton secara langsung di gadget Mudah Alih anda. Sekian, selamat malam. Terima kasih. Jumpa lagi. Thank you.